A couple of weeks ago, on a regular Thursday morning, the usual rush of getting our two kids ready for school was in full swing. It was around 7:30 a.m., and the house buzzed with the chaos of breakfast, backpacks, and last-minute checks. Suddenly, the phone rang loudly, cutting through the noise. I was curious. Who would be calling this early? The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, which made me even more curious. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" I said cautiously, holding the phone to my ear. To my surprise, it was my wife, Jessica, on the other end. I couldn't help but wonder why she was calling, especially since we had spoken just the night before. Jessica works at a small marketing firm in the city, and her call caught me off guard. I handle things at home, taking care of the kids and managing my work-from-home job, while Jessica is often traveling for her company. Despite our hectic schedules, we've made it work, living in a comfortable suburban home with 4 bedrooms and a small backyard. We're lucky to have a strong circle of friends nearby. Jessica told me that the night before, while she was at her hotel, someone stole her purse from the lobby. "Can you cancel all our credit cards as soon as possible?" she asked, sounding worried. "I already let my boss, Kate, know about it, and she's arranging for new company cards to be sent overnight so I can still get by. I'll need them for the client meeting tomorrow." I paused, surprised. Jessica is usually very careful about her belongings. "How did that happen?" I asked, trying to understand. "I made a dumb mistake," she admitted with a sigh. "I left my purse at the checkout counter when I went to grab a newspaper. By the time I got back, it was gone. The cashier was busy with another customer and didn't see anything. My driver's license was in there too, but the hotel staff is checking around to see if they find it." "Don't worry," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "I'll handle the cards." Hopefully, nothing else was taken. "Thanks," she replied. "Other than the $1,200 in cash I had on me, I think everything else can be replaced. At least most of my things are still in the room." "How are the kids?" "I missed them." I assured her the kids were fine, though the morning chaos probably told a different story. After we hung up, I immediately called to cancel our credit cards and started to push the incident to the back of my mind. Life went on as usual, but something strange happened that I didn't expect. Earlier today, I was going through some paperwork, trying to find our home insurance policy, when I stumbled across some statements from Jessica's personal account. It was from a separate investment fund she manages, money she inherited after her parents' tragic accident a few years ago. I've always respected her privacy regarding that account, but I couldn't help but glance at the balance. I knew the inheritance had been around $350,000, but to my surprise, it had grown to over $400,000. What really caught my attention, though, was a withdrawal of $3,000 from her money market account about 6 weeks ago. That withdrawal seemed odd, especially since it happened right around the time she lost her purse. I couldn't stop wondering what she had spent that money on, so I decided to dig a little deeper. To my shock, I found out that she had written a check to a local jewelry store just 2 days after her purse went missing. She never mentioned buying anything for me or anyone else. Jessica has a brother, but I couldn't imagine why she'd spend that much on him. Confused and curious, I looked up the jewelry store's phone number and gave them a call. A woman answered, introducing herself as a store representative, and I explained the situation, asking about the purchase. I told her there might be an issue with it and asked if there was a warranty. After a brief pause, the woman responded, "Oh yes, I remember this purchase clearly. Your wife was very upset when she came in. She said her wedding and engagement rings had been stolen, and she wanted to replace them. It wasn't an easy task, but we helped her pick out new ones. She used her company's credit card as collateral and later sent us a check to cover the cost." I was stunned. Jessica had never mentioned that her wedding and engagement rings were stolen. She had only told me about her purse. My mind raced as I tried to process this new revelation. I couldn't understand why she hadn't said a word about it. And now, here I was, sitting with the phone still in my hand, wondering what else I didn't know. I told the woman on the phone that I needed to discuss this matter with my wife before making any decisions. I politely ended the call, though she seemed slightly confused. My own confusion, however, was much greater. It was becoming clearer that Jessica's rings must have been in her purse when it was stolen. But why on earth would she be carrying her wedding and engagement rings in her purse? There was no reason, as far as I knew, for her to hide her marital status. Her job certainly didn't require her to pretend she was single. But if she wanted to appear unmarried in certain social situations, well, that thought made my stomach twist. It was a disturbing idea, one I didn't want to consider, but it was hard to shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, Jessica had been thinking of something I didn't want to believe, an affair. We've been married for 11 years, with 2 beautiful kids, Josh, 8, and Emma, 6. I always thought we had a solid, happy marriage. Our life seemed perfect, at least from my perspective. Sure, Jessica traveled a lot, usually once a month for a few days, but I never had a reason to doubt her. But now, doubts were creeping in. If she had been planning something, those business trips would have provided the perfect cover. Losing her rings seemed to have upset her enough to buy replacements that looked almost identical to the originals. I bought those rings years ago, back when my salary wasn't much, so they weren't expensive. Getting nearly identical copies wouldn't have cost much. She could have claimed the loss on our insurance, but that would have alerted me. Instead, she kept it quiet. If her purse was genuinely stolen at the hotel, she should have reported it to the police. I was beginning to wonder what she had actually told them. I found the hotel's number and gave them a call, asking if they had any record of a theft. To my surprise, they did. They faxed me a copy of the report Jessica had filed. When I read it, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. She had claimed that her purse was stolen while she was dancing in the hotel's ballroom. Dancing? She said she had left her purse on a chair while she went off to dance, and when she returned, it was gone. What troubled me even more was that Jessica had specifically noted that she didn't want to involve the police. Why? What was she trying to hide? The more I thought about it, the more things didn't add up. She had lied to me, not only about the rings but about where and how her purse was stolen. My mind raced, trying to figure out what this all meant. Was she seeing someone else? Was she dancing with another man while her rings sat tucked away in her purse, as if she wanted to appear single? It had been weeks since that night, and she was about to head off on another trip in a few days. I knew I had to dig deeper into her upcoming schedule and get a better idea of what she was really doing while she was away. If she was involved with someone else, maybe losing the rings had shaken her enough to rethink her actions. I dreaded what I might find if she really was being unfaithful. It would almost certainly mean the end of our marriage, and I couldn't bear the thought of what that would do to our kids. Jessica is a great mom, no doubt about that, but the idea of her having custody, especially with her constant travel, was something I couldn't stomach. I needed more answers, though. Was there something else? Some clue I was missing? If she was seeing other men, was she being careful? Would she be using protection? I figured she would, if only to avoid bringing home any infections or, God forbid, an unplanned pregnancy. After all, I'd had a vasectomy after Emma was born, so pregnancy was out of the question on my end. But she couldn't rely on the men she met having protection, which meant she'd likely be carrying it herself. But where would she keep it? She wouldn't leave something like that lying around the house, and I doubted she'd keep it in the car. Her office seemed the most likely place, or perhaps she carried it with her on her business trips. I knew she always brought a large briefcase with her, filled with work papers, her laptop, and presentations. If she had an early morning flight, she'd bring the briefcase home the night before, pack it, and have it ready to go. That briefcase was key. I needed to find a way to check it before her next trip. I made a plan to stay calm, not giving away any hint that something was bothering me. If I could act normal, I might just get my chance to search through her things. The day carried on as usual, with the kids coming home from school and dinner to prepare. I was distracted, but I tried to keep it together. When Jessica got home from work, I was in the middle of cleaning up a mess I'd made in the kitchen. I had knocked over a dish of beans, and between that and the kids running around, the place was a disaster. I looked a mess, and thankfully, she didn't seem to notice that I might have something on my mind. Once everything was finally cleaned up and the evening settled down, I found myself once again consumed by the questions swirling in my head. I greeted Jessica with a kiss on the cheek, just like any other evening, and we sat down at the table for dinner. Everything seemed normal as we engaged in our usual small talk. I didn't want to give her any reason to suspect I was onto something, especially with her upcoming trip in just a couple of days. "So, you're off on another business trip soon?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, she replied, sounding less than thrilled. Same old routine. I'm not exactly excited about it. I couldn't help but press a little further. If you don't enjoy it so much, have you thought about applying for a different role? You've been with the company long enough and know the ins and outs of everything. I'm sure you could transition into almost any position. She sighed and mentioned something about wanting more experience before moving to a desk job. I nodded and decided to shift the conversation in a way that might pull at her emotions. The kids and I really miss you when you're away, I said, trying to evoke a sense of guilt. I know. I'm sorry, she replied softly, her voice full of sympathy. I miss you guys, too. I wasn't ready to let it drop just yet. So, where are you headed this time? Will you be leaving in the morning? It'd be nice to spend a little time together before you go. I watched her closely, trying to gauge her reaction. I could feel the anxiety churning in my gut, making it hard to focus on eating. She didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. I'm just going to Denton, she said, casually. My flight's at 7:30 tomorrow morning, so I'll leave early. But don't worry, I'll be back by Friday. Then she winked playfully, adding, I'll need something to keep me going until then. I forced a smile and played along, though my mind was elsewhere. The fact that she'd be bringing her briefcase home the night before suggested she wouldn't stop at the office before heading to the airport. That meant I'd have a chance to check it. As we continued our dinner, she didn't seem to suspect anything, either about my growing unease or the thoughts swirling in my head. Maybe she hadn't done anything wrong, or maybe she had simply gotten really good at hiding it. I was determined to find out. Jessica returned home the next evening in high spirits. She parked her car next to mine in the garage, and I could see her excitement. It made me wonder, was it because of our conversation or something else? When she came inside, she didn't bring her briefcase with her. That piqued my interest, but I kept my cool, busying myself with dinner prep. After we ate, she casually asked if I could grab her suitcase from the garage. Of course, I said, trying to keep any suspicion out of my voice. Are you all set for your trip? Oh yeah, it's just routine, she replied. My briefcase is already in the car. I just need to pack an overnight bag. I took that as confirmation that her briefcase was still in the car, likely in the trunk. That was good. My plan was starting to come together. After we finished dinner, she helped clear the table and loaded the dishwasher. When she headed to the bedroom to pack, I went to the garage to get her suitcase. I expected the briefcase to be in the trunk, and sure enough, that's where it was. I didn't make any moves yet, but I had a plan in mind. Returning to the bedroom, I casually asked, Hey, where are the car keys? One of my tires seems to be leaking air. I was thinking about taking it to Jerry's shop before it gets worse. She looked puzzled for a second, but then handed me the keys from her purse. Can't you just use the spare? That's what it's for, right? She suggested. The spare's for emergencies, I replied, keeping my tone steady. We've got time to fix it properly, so I'd rather take care of it now. With that, I headed back to the garage, heart pounding. I drove her car to Jerry's shop, pulling up to one of the bays. I honked the horn to get his attention, and Jerry opened the door, waving me in. What's up, buddy? Jerry asked, leaning against the service desk. I looked at him, hesitating for a second. Tire trouble, I said, trying to keep things vague. But there's something else I need to check, too. Jerry gave me a knowing look. Everything okay at home? He asked, picking up on my unease. Maybe, I admitted, though I wasn't ready to say more. I popped open the trunk, grabbed Jessica's briefcase, and placed it on the workbench. Jerry, realizing I needed some privacy, nodded. I'll give you a minute. I've got a customer anyway, he said, heading back to the front of the shop. Alone in the bay, I unlocked the briefcase and carefully began my search. I didn't want to disturb anything, so I took my time, checking each compartment. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands felt clammy as I rifled through her papers and pockets. Then, I found it. A small package tucked into one of the briefcase's side pockets. I pulled it out slowly, and as soon as I saw what it was, my heart sank. It was an open pack of contraceptives. 3 were missing. I stared at the package in disbelief. My worst fear had just been confirmed. I carefully placed the package of contraceptives back where I had found it, closed the briefcase, and returned it to the trunk. Just as I finished, Jerry came back. His eyes held a hint of curiosity. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "What's going on?" he asked. My voice, heavy with disappointment, barely held steady. "Yeah, I did," I muttered. "Mind if I hang out here for a little while longer? Maybe you could check the tire pressure while I act like everything's fine." Jerry, sensing the gravity of the situation but not prying, simply nodded and got to work. He was a good friend, one I could rely on without needing to explain much. While he fiddled with the tires, I drove the car out of the bay and headed to the gas station to fill the tank. I wasn't sure when I'd get the chance to do something for her again, and the thought weighed on me as I filled up. On the drive back home, anger and frustration started to bubble up inside me. How could Jessica betray me, betray our kids, after everything we built together? The rage was overwhelming, but underneath it was a profound sadness. Our marriage was falling apart, and I knew I needed to think carefully about my next steps, especially when it came to the kids. Even though Jessica had hurt me deeply, I couldn't deny that she was a good mother. But I wanted full custody. I needed to protect our children from whatever she was getting involved in. Still, I couldn't shake the fact that she would have to explain our divorce to her family, her friends. That thought alone brought some small, bitter satisfaction. I walked back into the house and called out from the bedroom. "Everything's set? Just a small issue with a nail in the tire." "Thanks," Jessica responded from the other room, avoiding my gaze. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and joined the kids in the family room. They were watching one of their favorite shows, oblivious to the storm that was brewing in my head. About half an hour later, Jessica came in and sat beside me on the couch. By then, my emotions had calmed, though a deep sadness settled in, knowing that the family we had was already slipping through my fingers. To my surprise, she leaned in closer, snuggling up to me. She whispered softly, "Are you ready for tonight?" There was a playful tone in her voice, but it only made me feel emptier. I took a sip of my beer and answered, "I think so, but I've got a stomach ache." It wasn't entirely a lie. The knots in my gut had been there since the moment I discovered the package. "Oh, that's too bad, honey," she replied, her voice full of sympathy. She wrapped her arms around me, saying, "I love you." I instinctively put my arm around her shoulders, feeling a pang of conflict. Despite everything, part of me still felt affection for her. I couldn't help but wonder, why? Why had she done it? Was it for excitement? For something I couldn't give her? I might never understand the answer, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that the trust between us was broken. Later that evening, we put the kids to bed together. Watching her kiss our little ones goodnight, knowing she would be gone by morning, sent a fresh wave of sadness through me. The kids, used to her frequent travels, didn't seem to think anything of it. But I knew differently. That night, we made love, but the passion that usually came with it wasn't there. The act felt hollow, a final confirmation that things were slipping beyond repair. Noticing my distress, Jessica asked, "Is your stomach still bothering you?" I nodded. "Yeah, but I can handle it," I said, hoping against hope that she might reconsider the trip, that somehow she'd choose us over whatever this was. "Do you really need to go on this trip?" I asked, my voice tinged with desperation. I wanted it all to be some horrible dream that I could wake up from. She sighed, looking at me apologetically. "I'm sorry, honey, but this trip is important. I'll try to wrap things up quickly and be back for the weekend with all of you. I promise." With a heavy heart, I sighed. "Okay, honey, you'd better get some sleep. You've got to be up early for your flight. I'll take a shower now, so I don't have to worry about it in the morning." As she stepped into the shower, I couldn't stop myself from inspecting her suitcase. The clothes on top looked perfectly businesslike, but deeper inside, I found something else. Her most seductive lingerie and a sleek black cocktail dress she always wore when she wanted to impress. It was clear, this wasn't just a work trip. Respecting her space, I carefully returned everything to its place and closed the suitcase. I went back to bed, but sleep never came. I lay awake, listening to the clock tick, consumed by thoughts of what the next few days would bring. At around 5 a.m., I heard Jessica moving around, getting ready for her flight. I stayed in bed, choosing not to get up and see her off like I normally did. I just couldn't bring myself to say goodbye. She bent down to give me a kiss on the cheek before leaving, asking softly, "Still not feeling well, honey?" I nodded, unable to say much more. She left quietly, the sound of the garage door closing behind her, signaling her departure. As soon as I heard her car drive away, I got out of bed and headed to the shower, my mind reeling with what I had to do next. After getting the kids ready for school and eating a quick breakfast, I sat down with the phone book. I began searching for private investigator services, flipping through the yellow pages. My only goal was to find a detective agency that operated in the city Jessica was heading to. After calling around, I found a firm with a local branch in Denton. This was it, the first step toward finding the proof I needed. I scheduled a meeting with the private investigator for that same morning, hoping they could provide the information I needed. Next on my list was finding a divorce attorney. A friend had recommended someone, so I looked up his contact info and gave him a call. I managed to set an appointment for the afternoon, hoping he could guide me through the difficult process that now seemed inevitable. When I arrived at the private investigator's office, I laid out my concerns and arranged for Jessica to be surveilled the night she was away. I handed over a recent photo of her and provided the details of her trip, including her hotel and travel route. They assured me they would collect evidence, pictures, if possible, and compile a detailed report of her activities, focusing on what she did once her business day was over. We agreed on email updates, and they promised a full report by Monday morning. Satisfied with their professionalism, I paid them a substantial amount up front for their services. They did mention that, while they couldn't guarantee they'd get clear photos, they'd do their best to capture anything incriminating. I reluctantly agreed. That afternoon, I met with the lawyer. As expected, he explained the divorce process. He told me that in our state, divorce operates under a no-fault principle, meaning I didn't need to prove anything like infidelity to file. However, as the primary caregiver of our children, it was likely I would be granted custody. He stressed that Jessica would still have substantial visitation rights, as the courts prioritized the children's best interests. He also explained how our assets would be divided. Our property would be split 50-50, and while we had similar incomes, meaning alimony wouldn't be an issue, Jessica would still need to pay child support since I would have full custody of the kids. As for the inheritance she received, I made it clear I had no interest in it. It was hers to keep. My focus was entirely on making sure our children were okay. I told the lawyer to prepare the paperwork, citing irreconcilable differences, and I requested that Jessica be asked to move out of the house immediately after the divorce was finalized. He agreed, noting that, as the children's primary guardian, I had the right to make that request. We also decided that once the kids turned 18, the house would be sold, and the proceeds would be split between us. When I left the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of relief. It was a small comfort to know that life would go on for me and the kids, while Jessica would have to face the fallout of her betrayal. I hadn't yet taken any action regarding our joint finances, insurance, or other legal matters, assuming there would be time to deal with those after serving her the divorce papers. Considering her inheritance, I wasn't concerned about her share of our savings. Friday afternoon rolled around, and when Jessica returned from her trip, I tried to act as normal as possible. I offered to handle her laundry, but she declined, insisting she'd take care of it later. I couldn't help but smirk, knowing she wanted to keep control of it to conceal any trace of her secret life. It was a small victory for me, though it didn't erase the pain. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Jessica expressed concern about my ongoing stomach issues. "You've been dealing with this for too long. Maybe you should see a doctor," she suggested. I gave her a playful response, telling her that a friend had recommended a new medication for stomach problems and that I was hopeful it would help. "Maybe it'll clear things up and get me back to my old self," I said, trying to keep the mood light. She snuggled up closer, whispering that she missed me while she was away. The words felt hollow, but I didn't let on. Monday came, and after the kids left for school and Jessica headed to work, I got the call I had been waiting for from the detective agency. They told me the report was ready, and I wasted no time getting to their office. Within 30 minutes, I was sitting down with the office manager, going over the details. He handed me a copy of the report, explaining that it had just been faxed over from their office in Denton. "I haven't had a chance to read through it all," he admitted, "but from what I saw, it looks pretty damning." My hands shook slightly as I took the report and began reading. It outlined Jessica's movements during her trip, starting from the moment she arrived at the Denton Marriott Hotel on Wednesday, June 16th. According to the report, surveillance on Jessica began at 5:17 p.m. that evening. Her identity was confirmed by comparing a photo I had provided. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pages, eager but dreading what I might find. As I scanned the report, I found that the report detailed Jessica's movements, confirming her identity through both her company badge and a briefcase she carried. It noted she entered the elevator alone at 5:23 p.m., accompanied only by a staff member who confirmed her arrival at room 414. Importantly, the report stressed that she was alone when she entered the room. Along with this information, the investigator had included a photograph, labeled Exhibit 1A, showing Jessica dressed in professional attire as she entered the room. In the photo, she was still wearing her wedding rings. It was clear the photo had been taken discreetly, likely with a phone. At 6:31 p.m., the report continued, the investigator received word that Jessica had left her room. A minute later, she stepped out of the elevator into the lobby. Exhibit 1B showed her in a black cocktail dress and high heels. She wore the necklace I had given her for our 10th anniversary, but her wedding rings were conspicuously absent from her left hand. My heart pounded as I examined the photos. The woman in the pictures looked stunning, but she was someone I hardly recognized, a stranger. What hurt the most was seeing that she had removed her wedding rings, a deliberate act that confirmed my worst fears. The report grew more damning. At 8:51 p.m., the investigator noted Jessica was seen in a dimly lit restaurant, seated in a booth with a man. Exhibit 1D captured the two of them locked in a tight embrace, engaged in a passionate kiss. The photo was blurry, but the intensity of their connection was clear. According to the report, they left the restaurant shortly after, returning to Jessica's hotel room. Exhibit 1E documented them stepping into room 414 together. Jessica appeared slightly intoxicated, but undeniably pleased with how the night had gone. At 11:13 p.m., the man exited the room alone, leaving the hotel. The report even provided his license plate number and identified him as Alexander B. Tate, a married man with 2 young children living in Denton. As I read on, the realization hit me even harder. Jessica had repeated the same actions the next night, only with a different man. The report's final signature from the investigator sealed the betrayal I had never thought possible. This revelation left me reeling, filled with both anger and sorrow. Jessica wasn't just being unfaithful. She was living a double life, completely disregarding the vows we had made and the family we had built. Even the fact that she had lost her wedding rings hadn't stopped her from continuing her affairs. She had no intention of honoring our marriage anymore. After settling the bill with the private detective, I left the office, making sure to take 2 additional copies of the report, which were also saved onto a CD for safekeeping. My mind was racing as I headed home, but I didn't waste any time. The moment I walked through the door, I called my divorce attorney. I asked for an update on the divorce papers, and the attorney confirmed they were ready to be filed. Without hesitation, I told them to move forward and specifically requested that Jessica be served the papers publicly, at her workplace. This wasn't just about legal proceedings. It was about justice and, admittedly, a bit of revenge. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to be humiliated just as she had humiliated me. The attorney assured me it could be done smoothly and asked for her workplace address, which I provided. I knew this would be the final blow, a public acknowledgement of her betrayal. I wanted everyone to know, including her colleagues, just what kind of person she had become. That night, there was no pretense of love between us. Jessica seemed to sense something was wrong. Maybe she suspected I had uncovered something, though she didn't directly ask me. Instead, she expressed concern for my health, as if hoping that my persistent stomach issues would somehow explain my distant behavior. She seemed more reserved than usual, but I chose to ignore it. I had no desire to confront her just yet. The next morning, I woke up early after barely sleeping. My mind was too full, consumed with thoughts of the betrayal and the upcoming confrontation. I sat at my computer, pretending to work, but my focus was elsewhere. Soon, I heard the kids stirring, and I headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. knowing this would be one of the last mornings of normal life before everything would change. Jessica had no idea what was coming. By the end of the day, everything would be different. I just had to wait for the papers to be served and for the truth to unravel at last. I said goodbye to Jessica as she left for work that morning. She came to me for a hug and a kiss, but I gave her a half-hearted embrace, subtly encouraging her to leave. In that brief moment, I sensed that maybe she had a suspicion about what was coming. As I shut the door behind her, I noticed the tears welling up in her eyes, and she whispered, "I love you." After she left, an overwhelming sadness hit me. I wanted to cry, to release the flood of emotions, but I quickly pulled myself together. The kids needed me, and I had to get them ready for school. We moved through the morning routine, but the heaviness of the situation lingered. Around 10:45 a.m., the phone rang, interrupting the silence. The caller ID showed Jessica's workplace. I answered but didn't speak. After a long pause, Jessica's trembling voice broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Then the line went dead. I stood there, silent, not sure what to think or feel. That night, Jessica didn't come home. I wondered if she was continuing her deceit, indifferent to the wreckage she had left behind. My anger was justified, but I also felt a small twinge of guilt, wondering if I had been too harsh. The kids, sensing something was wrong, asked about their mom, and I did my best to keep their spirits up. To distract them, I took them out for dinner at McDonald's. It worked for the evening, but when we got home, the sadness returned, and they went to bed quietly, clearly missing their mother. The next morning, Jessica called again. "Honey, can I come home to pack my things? Can we talk?" she asked, her voice laced with guilt. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but it quickly passed. "Come between 9 o'clock and noon," I replied coolly. "The kids and I won't be here." Then I added, "As for talking, I'll only speak with you after you've signed and returned the notarized divorce papers. We'll meet in my lawyer's office." There was a sob on the other end before she answered, "Okay, I understand." Then the line went silent once again. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. Jessica had signed the papers, and our marriage was officially over. It turned out she had become pregnant during her affair, and when her attempts to hide it from her lover failed, the truth came to light. Even if I hadn't discovered her infidelity through the missing rings, her deceit would have surfaced eventually. Rumors began to circulate that she was dating again, and I considered warning any future partners about her unfaithfulness. After all, no one deserved to be hurt the way I had been. When we finally met in my lawyer's office for a final conversation, Jessica begged me to reconsider the divorce. She pleaded for more access to the kids, saying how difficult it was to be away from them. But I explained, calmly, that I couldn't trust her anymore. She then revealed that she had been seeing a psychologist who diagnosed her with nymphomania. She assured me that her compulsions were now under control. Still, I told her it wasn't enough. The fact that she hadn't sought help earlier was proof that she hadn't taken responsibility for her actions. If she had addressed her issues from the start, perhaps we wouldn't be here now, sitting in a lawyer's office, ending what was once a happy life together. Jessica broke down in tears as I walked out. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. In the months that followed, I learned more about her through mutual acquaintances. A school friend of mine, who now works at a nightclub, told me he'd seen Jessica there several times on weekends, often with different men, behaving provocatively. It pained me to hear it. I had hoped, for our kids' sake, that she might regain some sense of responsibility, but it seemed like she never fully recovered from her compulsions. Then, one of Jessica's old friends called me. She told me Jessica wasn't well, that she had contracted herpes due to her promiscuous behavior and needed help. As much as part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, I couldn't bring myself to offer any assistance. Jessica had made her choices, and she had to live with the consequences. I couldn't risk getting drawn back into her mess. In the meantime, I began dating again. I've met someone new, a woman about my age who has also been through a tough divorce. She discovered her ex-husband's infidelity and, like me, didn't tolerate being treated that way. There's something about her strength and resilience that I deeply admire. My kids like her, too, which feels like a blessing. It's been a slow process, but it feels natural, like the next step in moving forward. I think it's only a matter of time before I take this relationship to the next level. I've finally found peace and am ready to build a future, this time with someone who knows how to appreciate it.